Here we go. Another episode of Red versus Blue, number 25. We're at the quarter century mark of the program. My name is Mike Stark.
I'm Keith Curry.
And this week, we're going to take a look at the health of each campaign. And we're going to start with the Trump campaign. We had the trial this week.
Well, we're still in the middle of the trial, but this was the Stormy Daniels testimony week, and Stormy did pretty well on the stand. A lot of people were saying that they thought the defense was sort of making some points, but I think today people look at the trial and say Stormy sort of, put it to him in a variety of ways. When you're a presidential candidate and somebody is describing spanking you in your tidy whities with a magazine with your face on the cover while you associate the porn star with looking like your daughter, that's just a little bit too much of a reach for most Americans.
Not a good look.
Not a good look. Not presidential, as they used to say when presidential counted for something. So it was not a good week for Donald Trump in court. I think she came across as fairly credible. Pieces of the story are falling into place. A lot of people are commenting that her attorneys actually did a pretty good job on the first 2 days across, and that they were probably berated by Trump in the after hours and said, go in there and mess her up a little bit. And so they tried to be more aggressive, and that sort of backfired on them. So once again, Donald Trump is his own worst enemy when it comes to the trial. But it was not only in the courtroom that he had bad news. There was an election. The primaries are still going on. And in Indiana. Now, Indiana had a gubernatorial primary. They have an open race for governor. So there was reason for people to get out and vote. And Nikki Haley was on the ballot. Now, it's been 2 months, more than 2 months, since Nikki Haley has pulled out of the race. But yet she received nearly 22% of the vote. 518,000 fewer Republicans voted in this primary than voted in 2016. So from the health of the candidate's perspective, this is suggesting that, A, Donald Trump continues to have serious problems with a significant portion of the Republican Party, that there is an enthusiasm gap among Republicans, when 500,000 of them in a state like Indiana failed to show up to vote. And if you look deeper into the numbers of the vote, in Marion County, Indiana, which is where Indianapolis is, Haley received 35% of the vote. So he continues to have a problem with urban and suburban educated voters, and he's not really addressing it. And he won't address it because he won't lower himself to be nice to Nikki Haley or to acknowledge that Nikki Haley's voters are voters he should appeal to. She's meeting this weekend in South Carolina with some of her largest donors. She has not endorsed Trump and is not expected to endorse Trump coming out of this meeting, but she's keeping her political organization active as she should, because as any airline pilot knows, it's easy to crash and burn when you go into that nosedive. So anything could happen.
Absolutely. We have to caution everybody when we talk about those numbers with Trump, because that doesn't immediately transfer into votes for Biden. They just won't show up, right?
That's right. Now, it could be very detrimental to Republicans down ticket, but in the 7 or 8 states that are going to make a difference in the election, it will be absolutely critical.
Let's move on to the health of the Biden campaign. Now, he's got Israel problems, obviously.
Well, he does, and it's Friday, so I'm not exactly sure what side the United States is on today, because on Tuesday, he did a great speech against anti-Semitism, came out strongly and forcefully on behalf of Israel. And then on Wednesday, he decided he's not going to deliver 6,500 precision-guided munitions to Israel in an attempt to leverage them on the war. Now, the irony, of course, of this is that the precision-guided munitions are the ones least likely to cause civilian casualties. And if they don't have them, they'll likely use dumb bombs or artillery shells, which will cause more casualties.
Right.
But he is being whipsawed between his base and between the Jewish voters. And you know what state has a lot of Jewish voters? Pennsylvania. That's why John Fetterman has been such a stalwart supporter of Israel as a Democrat, and why those who are active and represent the suburbs of Philadelphia and Pittsburgh are also very active and strong in support of Israel. Joe Biden is just caught between two very hard places, and he's getting grounded by both. This week, you saw in the aftermath of that announcement, a lot of Democratic members of Congress. You saw resolutions in Congress to provide the arms for Israel. It's a complicated matter, but Trump himself was impeached for not providing congressionally authorized military aid to Ukraine. Now, he also tried to extort the president of Ukraine for his own political purposes. Some might say Biden is doing the same thing with Netanyahu, getting him to taken action that supports Biden's politics. You can argue that, and it probably was not a very good grounds for impeachment, but it's the same issue. So Republicans are going to be all up in arms and saying, look, Biden's doing the same thing they accused Trump of doing. Biden's in the middle of no man's land between the demonstrators and Palestinian supporters and the Hamas supporters, which, by the way, on the campus have become much more pro-Hamas than they are pro-Palestinians, and between a very powerful Israel lobby in the United States. And so he's just got no good place to go, and he's trying to walk down through the middle of the road, and he's losing on both sides.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about the health of the third party candidate, and we're going to be literally talking about the health of him. RFK, some revelations about his health.
Yeah, now this makes this perhaps the most bizarre week in American politics, because RFK, it was disclosed, had a flesh-eating worm in his brain that ate part of his brain. You either get this, as we've now learned from all of the medical commentary on the various news channels, you get this either from eating uncooked pork or from not washing your hands after going to the bathroom. So one way or the other, he got this worm. We also learned that RFK Jr. suffered from mercury poisoning from eating too much tuna fish. That has affected his brain and his cognition and his memory. Now, the Kennedy campaign has said that this does not impair his cognitive ability. The problem is that these revelations were made in a divorce filing with his former wife, in which he alleged that he should pay less alimony because his cognitive ability was impaired by the brainworm and by the mercury poisoning.
Oops.
So, yeah, it's like the internet. Court filings are forever. So he's sort of stuck in a very difficult place. But he had a positive development, though. He did apparently qualify for the California ballot. Now, Mike, you and I have talked in the past about the echoes of 1968 in this election. Right. Most of them focused on the expected demonstrations at the convention and what that might mean for Biden. But there's other echoes of 1968 as well. Remember that Robert F. Kennedy Sr. was assassinated in 1968 by a Palestinian upset with the results of the 1967 war. But the other big news in that election was that George Wallace emerged as the last viable third-party candidate to actually win states. Wallace formed the American Independent Party as his vehicle to run in that election. And in an irony that would absolutely shock and dismay both Robert F. Kennedy Sr. and George Wallace, RFK Jr. has qualified for the ballot in California and has been given the ballot designation of the George Wallace American Independent Party.
Oh, boy.
So here we go. It's 1968 in a lot more ways than people ever thought possible.
Wow. The alignment of our present day with 68 continues.
And it's not a year people remember fondly.
No, not at all. Okay, so we've discussed the health of the campaigns the best we can at this point. Now let's move to the next category, crash and burns for the week. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, we have to start with Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, who wrote a book in which she shot her dog, who wrote a book in which she alleged to have met with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. She recorded an audiobook. Now, the audiobook came out before the print book. And in the audiobook, she actually speaks the words that I met with Kim Jong-un. They figured out she actually didn't, and so they took it out of the print book that's coming out this week. But nonetheless, she has gone on TV. It was brought to her attention. It was fixed. But she doesn't admit it didn't happen. I mean, she is like, yes, so I'm not even going to talk about that. We're just going to move on. And then she doubled down and said not only did she shoot her own dog, but if the first thing she's going to do if she becomes vice president is she's going to shoot Joe Biden's dog if it's still around the White House. This has led to sort of the universal view by political pundits from everybody from Karl Rove to Jon Stewart saying, okay, you were once a candidate for vice president. You are not anymore. And I watched her performance on Sunday morning television on Face the Nation. By Tuesday night, she had canceled all further TV appearances to promote her book and had gone back to South Dakota to deal with, she said, weather issues. But this is just an example of how someone, apparently in an attempt to show themselves to be tough or macho or whatever, to appear to be vice president, totally humiliates and debases themselves by refusing to acknowledge basic truth and by refusing to acknowledge basic mistakes or by trying to elaborate or think something like shooting your dog in a gravel pit is something that would appeal to a certain kind of voter. Her political ambitions, I think, have been somewhat extinguished in terms of the vice presidency. Apparently, though, and again, there's always a good side or a flip side, she is a candidate to succeed William LaPierre as head of the National Rifle Association.
That's a joke, right?
That is not a joke. Seriously.
Oh, my God.
Now, here's the deal. If shooting your dog in a gravel pit is too much for the National Rifle Association, it's too much for anybody.
Yeah, exactly. It's a pretty clear message that you don't shoot your dog, or if you do, you don't talk about it.
That's the thing. And if I were Kristi Noem, the first thing I'd do is I'd get some better political advisors. Now, one commentator on News Nation suggested, well, is it possible that some liberal New York editor simply put that in your book to upset your campaign and sort of tried to advance a conspiracy theory? Even Kristi Noem didn't acknowledge the conspiracy theory, because to acknowledge anything would have been to acknowledge a mistake, and she would never do that.
Yeah.
But she had a bad week.
Yeah, exactly. Someone else had another bad week.
After 2 meetings with Speaker Johnson, Marjorie Taylor Greene did agree to bring her motion to vacate the speakership to the floor of the House of Representatives. She made an impassioned speech excoriating Mike Johnson as if he were Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders incarnate. And then, while she was speaking, there was a split screen, and several Republican members of the House went on to the steps of the Capitol and in rotation denounced her as Moscow Marjorie, as being utterly ineffectual and foolish, as being a child. And that was playing while she was doing her speech in a side-by-side TV cut. She did get 12 votes. It was too stupid for even Matt Gaetz to vote for. And that is a high standard of stupidity. So hopefully she has learned her lesson, and she and Tom Massey have been relegated. In the old days, the speaker would, if this were Willie Brown as speaker, these people would have offices someplace in Peoria when it comes in terms of Washington, D.C. We'll see what Speaker Johnson does to deal with that. And kudos to Hakeem Jeffries, who took full advantage of this and got himself a full 15 minutes on 60 Minutes to look statesmanlike and make the Democrats look like adults. So thank you, Marjorie Taylor Greene, for that help in the campaign in the fall.
That is a lot of stuff that went on this past week. And as you said, it probably was one of the most bizarre weeks in political history, but it's all summed up right there. I think we covered it.
Let us hope that this country never has to face another year where porn star, dead dogs, brainworms are all part of the political conversation in the same week.
Well stated, my friend. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Red versus Blue. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe to the podcast, like our Facebook page, and tell a friend about us. Yes, absolutely. Tell a friend about us. And also give us a glowing review on whatever platform you listen to the show from. And we will see you again next week for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.